Today on Ag News Daily.
Even if you find, one or two lesions in your field, it doesn't mean you need to worry and get out and spray straight away. I feel that we can wait a little bit. You've got to be careful with this. You can't wait until it's so bad that you can see it, from the truck window, because by then it's too late.
Welcome back to the weekly edition of the Ag News Daily podcast. It is Friday, August 8th. Delaney Howell joined this morning by JC Ambrose. JC, you are counting down to your final weeks here of the Ag News Daily internship. We're excited to have you in the co-host seat this week as Tanner is out on vacation.
Yes, it's an exciting week because Tanner and I have a duo with hosting the podcast. So first time with Delaney, and I'm excited to wrap things up. It seems like a perfect way to kind of go out.
Well, you're getting ready to start back into school here shortly. As you think about getting ready to start back into the fall swing of things, what's been your favorite thing about the internship so far this summer?
I think my favorite thing so far has just been producing content, as just getting more in depth in my skills and really learning a lot, going from writing a script to being here and recording and then editing. It's been great to see the whole process so far.
Well, we've loved having you on the team, JC, but this summer it's been a mixture of weather here in Iowa and in this state of Nebraska. Why don't you give us a rundown for weather from this past week?
For sure, let's dive into that. This week, the Midwest saw mild temperatures to start off the week, but smoke from Canadian wildfires led to some poor air quality in some areas. Light showers moved through the north midweek, and temperatures have since trended a little bit warmer. A stronger front will move into the weekend, bringing some scattered rain showers and some cooler conditions. Across the Central Plains, early week storms and cooler air gave way to a warmer pattern that's happening now, and temperatures are running above average and will stay higher throughout the weekend. Rain was more common in Nebraska, while the Southern Plains stayed mostly dry. In the Northern Plains, they had showers as well nearly every day this week. While the rainfall helped maintain soil moisture for those corn and soybean crop, it has been less favorable for the maturing wheat during the harvest. In some areas that picked up heavier rain, quality issues may become a concern as that harvest continues, like I said. But I think Delaney has what's been happening with the crop progress from last week.
I certainly do. As we take a look at the latest crop progress report, there weren't many changes from the previous week as weather remained generally favorable outside of the wet conditions. Corn conditions held steady with 73% of the crop rating good to excellent. By the end of the week, 88% has reached the silking stage, 42% reaching the dough stage, and 6% dented. Soybeans dipped slightly with 69% rated good to excellent, down 1 point from the previous week. And around 85% of that crop has bloomed, with 58% setting pods, both in line with the 5-year averages. Winter wheat harvest is nearly complete at 86%, just a percentage point here behind the average pace. And in most states, more than 95% of the crop has been harvested, while spring wheat ratings slipped by 1 percentage point to 48% rated good to excellent. 95% of the crop has headed, while only 5% has been harvested so far. And I know we're wrapping up sweet corn season here as well. JC, I've been getting in sweet corn almost every day this week, and gonna be doing hopefully some freezing this weekend. So
Oh yeah, my mom has been breaking out her canner and getting that all set up, so that's been pretty popular with her. But trade has been a big topic within these past few weeks, and we have some updates for you. On Wednesday, President Trump signed an executive order imposing a 25% tariff on Indian imports in response to India's continued purchase of Russian oil. This brings the total U.S. tariffs on India to 50%. The tariffs are set to take place in effect in 21 days, and this is to give India and Russia some time to negotiate. During an Oval Office event with Apple CEO Tim Cook, President Trump said, quote, "Right now they're paying a 50% tariff. We'll determine later." The official spokesperson of the Ministry of External Affairs of India called the decision unfortunate and added, quote, "We reiterate that these actions are unfair, unjustified, and unreasonable." He also said India's oil imports are driven by market factors that are vital to energy security for its 1.4 billion people. India has continued to buy discounted Russian oil under a 2022 price cap introduced by the U.S. and its allies. The cap aimed to restrict Russian revenue without disrupting global supply, but Russia has largely avoided it by using non-sanctioned ships and issuers outside the Western system. Looking towards the future, the White House says President Trump could meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin as soon as next week. So that's something we'll really have to keep an eye on in the headlines when we look at next week with this trade news, Delaney.
Well, in some other trade news headlines here, President Trump's higher tariffs on imports from dozens of countries took effect here earlier this week on Thursday, raising the average U.S. import duty to around 18 to 19%, which is the highest level since the 1930s. Tariffs now range from 10 to 50%, with Brazil and India facing some of the highest rates at 50%, followed by Switzerland at 39% and Canada at 35%. President Trump posted on Truth Social saying, quote, billions of dollars, largely from countries that have taken advantage of the United States for many years, laughing all the way, will start flowing into the USA. He says these tariffs will help reduce the U.S. trade deficit and boost domestic manufacturing. Several countries, including the European Union, Japan, and South Korea, have secured framework deals to reduce their tariffs toward 15%. Other nations like Switzerland and South Africa continue negotiations after failing to avoid the tariffs before the deadlines, and the tariffs are already pushing up prices for consumers and increasing costs for businesses. In a briefing, Toyota says it expects to take a nearly $10 billion hit from U.S. auto tariffs and has cut its full-year profit forecast by 16%. The White House says this new tariff structure is the start of a broader effort to reshape U.S. trade relationships.
That's been an interesting look at as far as developments come out. I feel like we've been watching them like a hawk, and new things just keep sprouting up all the time, so we'll have to keep an eye on that. But we've also been keeping an eye on some USDA nominations. Last Saturday night, Luke Lindbergh of South Dakota was confirmed as the USDA's new Undersecretary for Trade and Foreign Agricultural Affairs. During his confirmation hearing earlier this year, Lindbergh told the Senate Agriculture Committee, quote, America's agricultural trade deficit is the worst in our nation's history. For far too long, we've let other countries access our market without securing reciprocal access to theirs. I support free trade agreements that put American farmers and ranchers first and help reverse this trend. Lindbergh previously served as Chief of Staff and Chief Strategy Officer at the Export-Import Bank, and most recently he was President and CEO of South Dakota Trade, which is a public-to-private group that helps expand international market access for regional exporters. Several other USDA nominees are still waiting for their Senate floor vote, and this includes Richard Fordyce, Michael Bourne, Dudley Hoskins, and Scott Hutchins. So we'll have to see where they're going with their nominations, and hopefully they'll get the ball rolling on them coming in the next few weeks. Keeping with some more USDA news, on Monday, U.S. Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins and Health Secretary Robert Kennedy Jr. signed 6 new state waivers for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or otherwise known as SNAP. Beginning in 2026, these waivers will stop SNAP benefits from being used to buy sugary drinks and other unhealthy foods in West Virginia, Florida, Colorado, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Texas. Secretary Rollins said, quote, these waivers promote healthier food choices while continuing to support families facing hard times. Secretary Kennedy also added, quote, for years, SNAP has used taxpayer dollars to fund soda and candy, products that fuel America's diabetes and chronic disease epidemics. These waivers help put real food back at the center of the program. Governors from the states involved praised the waivers as important steps to improve public health and reduce obesity and chronic illness. This action builds on earlier waivers approved for states like Nebraska, Iowa, and Indiana under the USDA's Making America Healthy Again initiative.
Well, JC, we seem to be at a repair rights crossroad here with John Deere, as they've launched a new digital tool called the Operation Centers Pro service to give equipment owners more control over maintaining and repairing their machinery. This move, of course, comes amid ongoing right-to-repair discussions and aims to support customer self-repair. This service is available to U.S. and Canadian customers through the John Deere Operations Center app. It gives equipment owners access to repair diagnostics, service information, and software updates, even for machines that aren't connected. Also, the service will cover John Deere's ag, turf, construction, and forestry equipment. Starting at $195 per machine per year, the subscription allows users to install software needed for electronic component replacements and access detailed repair content filtered by year and model. This new service replaces the older customer service advisor tool and works alongside other John Deere digital platforms like Equipment Mobile and shop.deere.com. It also includes features such as operator manuals, diagnostic codes, warranty information, and software updates. And these tools aim to help equipment owners troubleshoot and repair their machines more efficiently, according to John Deere. So, could be a step in the right direction here. Could be a nod at addressing some of these concerns in the right to repair cases. There's a lot of speculation over the timing of this announcement.
Yes, we've been keeping up with that so far, but I think it's interesting to note how they're going to have it with machines that aren't connected yet. I wonder how that'll work. We'll have to keep and see if we hear any feedback about that from producers so far.
Absolutely. But JC, according to the latest Crop Protection Network map, tar spot has now been confirmed in 13 of the top 18 corn producing states. And additional cases have been reported as far east as Georgia, Maryland, and even New York. As of early August, infected crops have been confirmed in Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Kentucky, Michigan, Minnesota, Missouri, Nebraska, Ohio, Pennsylvania, South Dakota, and Wisconsin. In Iowa alone, tar spot has now been confirmed in 37 of the 99 counties. That's over a third of the state. Nebraska has also seen a rise in infections with tar spot, now confirmed in 31 counties. Elsewhere in the Midwest, Syngenta agronomists say the disease remains a serious concern as corn nears maturity, and USDA crop ratings across the region remain mostly stable, not noting the increase in tar spot conditions. USDA and agronomists, however, say they're keeping close eyes on the development as the growing season advances.
That's an interesting update because that relates right to an interview that we had this week. Delaney and I had the opportunity to speak with Dr. Martin Chilvers out of Michigan State University. He shared insights about the current spread of tar spot disease and what producers should be watching for, and now how they can scout and manage their fields. Let's dive into that great conversation now.
We are chatting today with Dr. Martin Chilvers of Michigan State University, professor there, to give us the latest update on how things are continuing to spread across the country. Martin, thanks for joining us today on the podcast. We certainly are going to be appreciative of your insight you're going to share with us today.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
So let's get right into it. You are a professor there at Michigan State University. You are keeping close tabs on this year's growing season and the latest updates on tar spot. Before we get into kind of the latest models that you've been watching, let's talk just high level tar spot in general. The conditions for tar spot. This year, we've been having a pretty wet growing season for much of the Midwest. How does tar spot like wet conditions in general?
Yeah, water is important. However, more important is the temperature. So tar spot really is favored by cooler temperatures. So we did have some weeks of above normal temperatures. And so that has really slowed things down. I guess we've probably had a couple of different sort of risk windows now. Early in the season, we did have some cool conditions with a little bit of moisture. And we did see some tar spot pop up early, especially in northern Indiana. That was in June, I believe. Then, we got that warmer spell across most of the Midwest, and that has really slowed things down. The last couple of weeks here in Michigan, we've definitely been getting a lot of reports across the state. But for the most part, not very high level. So just, a spot here or there, not levels that we need to be super concerned about at this point in time.
Delaney and I have been keeping a watch on the crop protections map so far. Can you give us an overview of where it's at so far and how the spreading is going about through that map and other resources?
Yeah. So, for your listeners, everything we're kind of talking about today is at the Crop Protection Network. So this is a fabulous resource that multiple universities have been involved in putting together. And so up there we have a map for tar spot and other diseases as we find them during the season. Yeah, as I was saying, so northern Illinois, northern Indiana, and probably northern Illinois too, there were some detections in June. Since then, we've had detections, across Wisconsin, southern Minnesota. Looks like a little bit in South Dakota now as well, and across Iowa too. So with that map that you can look at, there's a couple of things to look at. So we've got grayed out areas on that map, and that is basically where we have found tar spot in previous years. And so if we've found it in previous years, given the right weather conditions, it's going to be there again, potentially in those fields or in that region. Because it's soil, or it's residue borne. So tar spot survives on the residue, hangs out, and for the next season. So again, anything that's grayed is where tar spot's been confirmed in the past. So there's parts of South Dakota and North Dakota that don't have any detections in them yet. But that'll probably change again this season as we get later into the season and we see tar spot continue to spread across the region. So it's a really helpful map. Also, with that map, we did put in there a table for you to think about. If I find tar spot, what does this mean? Should I get out and spray? What should I really be looking at? And so for the most part, we're really looking at that sort of R1, that tassel silking timing, through to about R3, sometimes R4 growth stage is, when, if we need it, is typically the best window for fungicide timing.
Yeah, it's interesting to note, as you mentioned, that table there of when the tar spot is found, because it says pretty point blank, a confirmation of tar spot does not mean the disease is severe or a fungicide application is needed. Martin, is that simply due to timing of when the tar spot is found?
Yes, more or less. So what we didn't want people to do is, if I light a county up, that does not mean everyone needs to get out and spray their corn immediately. It means it's been found in the county. It tells you nothing actually about how severe it is, but it tells you it's been found. So what it tells you is to get out and scout. And even if you find, one or two lesions in your field, it doesn't mean you need to worry and get out and spray straight away. I feel that we can wait a little bit. You've got to be careful with this. You can't wait until it's so bad that you can see it, from the truck window, because by then it's too late. But if you're, on top of things and you have the flexibility to spray when you want to spray, you can potentially wait a little bit for, disease to start getting going and then come in and make that spray application. So perhaps, you're starting to see it move up on the foliage a little bit, or maybe get to, I do think we can probably wait until maybe 50% of the plants have a spot on them. And I'm talking about any, tar spot on them. I need to, again, be careful because things can move pretty quickly. But it's all about the weather conditions. If it's hot, it's not going to move as quickly as if it's much cooler.
Yeah, and when we talk about spreading, like you're talking about, can you give any tips for producers when they're out in the field? What should they be looking for? And do you have any insight on how they can make this process a little bit easier when they have a lot of acreage to cover?
Yeah, and that's part of the challenge, right? Getting out and actually scouting everything. Corn is challenging to scout. I tend to look on the western side of field edges, anything that might be collecting the winds, the prevailing wind. The western side is also kind of good because that gets the sun much later in the day, and so it stays moist for a little bit longer. Along tree lines, near lower parts of the field, that can also be helpful. Anything that might sort of accumulate a little bit more moisture, might be a spot to go and scout. We've also in our work also found that plant population can have an effect. Not so big an effect to actually, change what you should be doing in terms of planting. But if there are any gaps in the field, that's where you might, find tar spot developing a little bit sooner. So that could be another, tip for scouting.
Now, it's interesting to note too, Martin, that as you think about tar spot, there are a couple of other diseases that look very similar to tar spot. And so that's one other consideration that growers should make, to be vigilant when looking at those different diseases that could come up. And Any tips on tools to make sure you are confirming it is actually tar spot and not rust or other diseases?
Yeah. Again, the Crop Protection Network, we have a nice encyclopedia of diseases. You could, if you're not 100% sure, get in and have a look at some of the imagery. I think some of the things that could be confused could be early grey leaf spot, maybe anthracnose, anything that's making a dark lesion. We definitely have a lot of insect frass or bug poop that sometimes triggers a spray, and it was never tar spot, right? It was actually insect poop. So, so insect frass or insect poop will dissolve and wash off the leaf. So get lots of water on there, see if it'll rub off. If it does, then it's probably insect frass. If it doesn't, and if the lesions are sort of aligned with the leaf veins, and there's a little bit of yellowing or browning around that lesion and it protrudes through the bottom side, and it's raised a little bit, they're all the keys that I look for when we're trying to, confirm tar spot. But if you're not sure, please reach out to another ag professional or, universities, diagnostic labs at the universities. You'll be more than happy to help with those confirmations. I guess the other thing to note too is southern rust. It sounds like through Nebraska, that's, really blowing up this season. We have a map for that as well. So yeah, that's another disease to pay attention to this season.
For sure. And even with the podcast, we've looked at a lot of digital methods. Is there anything out there that could help producers with tar spot? Anything out within the universe that they could use to help themselves out?
There, you mean in terms of identifying the lesions?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there may be some tools out there. I know there's a lot of different companies coming through the AI-based systems, right, to do identification, and that's totally fine. But if you're not sure, please, don't rely on AI to answer your question for you at this point. I mean, use it as a tool, just like we use risk modeling and other factors or other information as tools. But I would be careful about relying, 100% on those at this point.
Martin, as we think about just the last 10 years, really, since tar spot has been found and prevalent in the Midwest, make some comparisons for us of just how different, how advanced have we seen tar spot become, and what's the speculation here for how much is this going to continue to impact, especially yield and the future of crop management for producers moving forward?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say here in Michigan and other areas that have had tar spot for a longer period of time, we've been able to screen through a lot of those hybrids that are really susceptible and just get those out of the lineup. I think that's really key. Some of these states that are just really getting tar spot now, like North and South Dakota, I think that's going to be their challenge. And they'll probably have some really bad years as they, realize that some of these hybrids are really susceptible. It takes a long time to create new hybrids. There's always, there's a pipeline of new material coming through. So on the breeding front, progress is maybe not always as quick as we'd like, but I think we definitely are, way more ahead of things than where we were, 10 years ago, where we had no idea. So I think the big thing, regionally or across the region is that it's going to continue to spread. I think the other thing that'll happen is that when we get ideal conditions for it, especially a really cool summer, that's when we're going to see some really big issues, some really, some damage. For us, really, at least across the Midwest, we had an epidemic in 2018 that was really around Lake Michigan, just where primarily tar spot was restricted to. And then in 2021, we had a much bigger epidemic, across Michigan, Wisconsin, Indiana, Illinois. That'll happen again when we get a cool summer and enough time for tar spot to develop through the season to do a lot of damage. Again, though, with planting hybrids that have better resistance to this, and then when needed, a fungicide, we're definitely much better placed at managing it than where we were 10 years ago, without a doubt.
And not to put a quick follow up to that, not to put comparisons on the map, but when you think about tar spot to other drought, disease, pests, etc., where would you say tar spot ranks as far as priorities when it comes to genetic development of all of the other things that we're trying to test and improve for in seed development.
Yeah. Well, we definitely can't. We tend to get a little bit, blinders on all around TarSpot, right? We can't be doing that. We have to keep the whole gamut of diseases out there in mind. And I mentioned southern rust. That can be a very devastating disease. I think it was last year that did quite a bit of damage in Iowa. So we've got to certainly keep these other diseases in mind. Grey leaf spot, northern leaf blight. We set up a drone trial last year to target TarSpot. We saw no TarSpot in the trial. We saw massive differences with northern leaf blight. So yeah, we've got to keep across all the different potential threats, and not just sort of get tunnel vision for TarSpot. That's for sure.
And when you talk about TarSpot moving to new states and new counties, maybe people don't really know how to necessarily deal with it. What are some common misconceptions that you hear about TarSpot from people who are first encountering it?
That it's a fertility issue. No, it's not a fertility issue. It doesn't matter if you've got really healthy corn or sick corn. It's going to go down with TarSpot. And you might argue that the healthy corn can resist it a bit better. Yeah, maybe a little bit, but it's pretty minor. When you get a true epidemic, true disease pressure on a susceptible hybrid, there's no foliar feed you can put on to slow down TarSpot. I think that's one of the big things. We have an FAQ guide in Crop Protection Network here, and I think part of that deals with fertility and some of those discussions. I think that's one of the big ones. For new areas, you've got to be on identifying it, realizing how quickly it can develop if you're not out there scouting, fairly frequently. I think people tend to get caught off guard, and that happened here in Michigan. I'd ask my farmers, like, hey, do you have any TarSpot? Like, no, let's go and have a look. And sure enough, it's there, right? So you've got to be on top of it. So I think there are a couple of the keys, and then just being aware of your hybrid susceptibility. So make sure you talk to your seed dealer. Is this hybrid? Does it have any, partial resistance to TarSpot? How does it do with northern leaf blight or grey leaf spot or southern rust? Being aware of how your hybrids stack up in terms of these different disease threats that are out there. I think that's really important.
Fantastic. Well, before we let you go, you mentioned quite a few different resources. We'll be sure to share those in our show notes today. But just a quick plug for those. What is the best place to go for our listeners tuning in today?
Yeah, the best thing to do is just Google Crop Protection Network. And then once you get to that web page, you'll be able to find under the resources tab the maps for TarSpot, southern rust, of corn and other things. And then under tools, we have return on investment calculator. That's a fairly new there's two calculators in there. There's one for corn fungicides. So you might want to get in there and play around with that. That sort of comes pre-populated with, a certain bushel per acre and commodity price, but you can get in there and change those. We've also pre-populated with what we've accumulated in terms of product price. But again, we don't know what you're purchasing your products for or your application costs. So get in and change those numbers and have a look, see what your return on investment might be. There's also a really good one in there for white mold on soybean. So that's something else to look at. But Crop Protection Network, get in there and have a look. There's also the crop disease forecasting tool underneath that tools drop down list. So get in there and have a look. And there's a whole range of tools in there now too. I think that's got grey leaf spot, and I think it also has ear mold as well. So we're putting a whole bunch of tools up. It's a fantastic site, great collaboration with all the colleagues there across the country. So really helpful.
Fantastic. Well, Dr. Chilvers, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. This has been super helpful and insightful, and I hope our listeners have felt that too.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you to Dr. Martin Chilvers for, of course, being on the podcast and giving us a little bit more insight about TarSpot and some other diseases coming up within the next few weeks and months that we're looking at before harvest. Of course, we got some fertilizer update, and taking a look at that update, but Update by StoneX, India's recent nitrogen fertilizer tender reached its 2 million ton goal. Combined purchases from June and July now total about 3.5 million tons, and more tenders are expected in 2025, depending on the monsoon season. China plans to export around 3 million tons of nitrogen fertilizer next year, and that's well below normal but higher than in 2024. Export limits to India may be only 200 to 300,000 tons, leaving some extra supply looking for some buyers in that market. Urea prices at New Orleans dipped on the India news, but then bounced back. That corn to urea ratio is 99 bushels per ton, one of the worst for this time of the year. UAN prices remain high with ratios near 79 bushels per ton, but supply worries continue due to low inventories, possible import issues from Russia, and plant downtime in North America. Demand for ammonia fertilizer could rise this fall as farmers adjust their plans. Looking at phosphate overall, China's exports remain low, expected at 4.5 million tons next year. That's much less than the usual 8 to 10 million. India has capped phosphate prices at $810 per ton after rebuilding stockpiles to about 1.75 million tons, but that's still below a comfortable level. In North America, phosphate prices at New Orleans have climbed above $800 per ton, now matching Indian prices, plus with the U.S. tariffs. This makes India a preferred destination thanks to lower shipping costs and tariff certainty.
Well, as we take a look at the larger commodity markets this week, JC, a lot of eyes were turned to the grains this week as we prepare for next week's August WASDE report, which releases Tuesday, August 12th. A lot of analysts this week were pulling together historical data reports because traditionally August has been a market mover. For example, Arlen Suderman with StoneX was pulling historical yield data looking at the likelihood of seeing a corn yield rise in the August WASDE report. And he said that there is a small bias toward raising yields in the August report and actually lowering the soybean yields based on the last about 30 years of historical data. That was confirmed by quite a few other analysts as well, including Naomi Bloom and Karen Braun. StoneX customer service report pegged the U.S. corn crop at a 188.1 bushels per acre, with soybeans at 53.6. That is a little higher than the average trade estimate here. Average trade is coming in across analysts surveyed at a 185, which would push ending stocks closer to a 2 billion bushel carryout, barring, of course, no changes to demand. And that could lead to some negative prices for producers, according to Naomi Bloom. As we look at the soybean side of the balance sheet, soybean yield trade estimates here are coming in at 53 bushels per acre. So all in all, a pretty high likelihood that we will see Tuesday's WASDE be a market mover. And ahead of that time, markets are certainly trying to find their footing to figure out how to shore up positions ahead of that report. In the soybean markets this week, we saw some pretty tight trading ranges. November soybeans did, however, sink to a 4-month low under $10 earlier this week. And in new crop corn futures, corn on Wednesday sank to a new low of $3.96 on the board. Taking a look at livestock markets this week, October live cattle hit a new contract high of $232.22. And in the feeder cattle side of the things here on Thursday, feeder cattle had a continuing rallying day. Didn't quite touch limit up here, but put on about $6, just over $6 on the board, hitting fresh contract highs continuously here. About $3.48 is where they rounded things out, almost $3.49 on the board. So continuing to see full steam ahead here for the livestock markets. And it's interesting, my dad sent me a TikTok video. I don't know how he even found it, from the Hot Barn Report. So we've got to give Monty James a shout out there, fellow farm broadcaster. He does a great job keeping folks up to date on where the latest is at from a local sale barn perspective, really getting into the weeds on what is going on with this crazy cattle market. Absolutely. You can find us at Ag News Daily on all major social media platforms, so be sure to follow along. And what do you say, JC, with that? We let the people go.
Let's let them go.